The following program, The Lightning Strike, is sponsored by Mohammed Fahim, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of NewsWeb Radio Company or its management.
Get ready to be jolted out of the ordinary and into a world where conversations are charged with intensity and facts. The Lightning Strike Talk Radio with your host, Mohammed Fahim, broadcasting live from the heart of the city on Chicago's Progressive Talk Radio, WCPT 820 AM. Welcome to a radio show that charges through the airwaves with an electricity like no other. Here's your host, Mohammed Fahim.
In the studios today, Sheila White.
Good morning.
And Maria Muzaffar.
Good morning.
Ken DeLuke would be joining us online.
Howdy.
Hey, Ken. And John Arena is actually not going to be in the studio with us or on the air today, and I hope that he could call in and we could take him on. We got a very packed schedule for the show today, folks. We have got 3 guests coming on. Our first guest is going to be Mr. Haroon Siddiqui. I'll introduce him in just a minute. Then we have Jesse Jackson Jr. joining us at about 9:20, and at about 9:40 we have Chuck Krugel, who is a prominent employment law attorney in Chicago, joining us to discuss all this crazy stuff that is happening with all the firings that Doge and Trump is doing and the legality of those things. So we will be having a lot of people on the show today. And on that note, I want to bring in my first guest, Mr. Haroon Siddiqui, who is the editorial page editor emeritus at the Toronto Star and a senior fellow at the Massey College at the University of Toronto. And long before Mehdi Hassan Minhaj, or Bassem Youssef, there were renowned Muslim Canadian journalist Haroon Siddiqui, reporting for 50 years from 50 countries and at the helm of Canada's largest newspaper, the Toronto Star, for 38 of those. He has long championed diverse stories and pluralism, and he is also a recipient of the Order of Canada for his journalism, the highest award given to a civilian. Siddiqui's work has also appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Globe, and The Mail, and we are very, very, very happy to welcome Mr. Haroon Siddiqui. Good morning.
Good morning to you, sir. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. If you can speak up a little bit, and if you've got your radio on, if you're listening, just listen on the phone so it doesn't give any feedback to us. And thank you so much for joining us. So you started off with writing a book called Being Muslim, and now the most recent memoir that you have, My Name Is Not Harry. I read some of the excerpts of that phenomenal book. Can you walk us through what made you write that book?
What made me write that book was I initially started writing about how Canada has changed for the better in the last 50 years that I've been here. But my publisher suggested that I write also about my origins in India. And the way she explained it was that we all bring complicated histories to Canada and to the United States. That's what enriches our national narrative, and that is how I wrote about India and then about Canada, and how Canada and the Western world has evolved for the better. That's one. And as the name suggests, it's really a mischievous title, which is a way of saying one ought to feel proud of one's identity, about one's name. One need not change one's name. Be proud of who you are, and that is the great promise of democracy, and that's how we all feel equal and we extend equal dignity to each other.
I was reading something that Canada has no official culture. It follows that there's no standard way of being a Canadian, right? Beyond obeying the law,
Yes.
That's what you say. So let me ask you a little bit about the difference between Canada and what we are trying to do over here in America now, as far as the DEI is concerned. But coming from India in 1967, that was a long time back. What made you come from India to Canada?
Oh, that's another separate story. The Canadian High Commissioner in India, whom I had run into at a meeting, and he said, well, young men like you should go to Canada. And in my youthful arrogance, I had said, why would anyone want to go to Canada? It's so bloody cold there, isn't it? But I ended up coming, and I ended up staying, and I'm happy that I did. As per your question, The two major differences that have been talked about always between the United States and Canada, both are democracies, of course. One is an assimilationist model, which is the United States. Be American, speak like American, behave like American, do in Rome as the Romans do. Canada has taken a different approach, which is an integrationist approach. And our Prime Minister in the 1970s, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of the current Prime Minister, had famously got up in Parliament and said Canada has no official culture. All citizens are equal. There is no one single way of being a Canadian. So be Canadian in a million ways that you want to be, so long as you obey the law. What that does is provides room for people to grow, not be on the defensive by majoritarian mores. There is no one way of being Canadian, and that lets people thrive and feel their dignity, and the larger society is the better for it.
Well, I've got Maria and Sheila also in the studio with me today, and Ken is also joining us on the phone. You guys want to ask any questions for Mr. Siddiqui? I mean, such a fascinating personality that we have today.
Yeah, no, this is Maria. Thank you, Mr. Siddiqui, for joining us. I was actually motivated to kind of go back to some of the first few days that you landed in Canada, and I know that you made a distinction between the way the United States addresses diversity and the way that Canada does. Did you feel what was the overall attitude in privately and publicly? So public-facing institutions or agencies, and when they were communicating with you in your first year in Canada, and your private engagements that made you feel like diversity is very encouraged in Canada?
No, one of the first shocks in Canada was that there was no yogurt available. You know, yogurt is a basic staple for Indians, food, especially South Indians. In fact, no proper rice, no proper vegetables, no yogurt, no cumin, no cardamom. So the whole range of spices that we Indians are used to were missing. And I phoned my mother and said, none of these things is available here. So my mother said, son, you better come back home in that case. What kind of country have you gone to? But 50, 60 years later, Canada and even the United States are the cuisine capitals of the world. So that's one big change that has happened. And it has happened because of immigration. It has happened because we have opened our doors to peoples of all cultures, and we have welcomed them. And this is more or less true of the United States as well. In terms of institutions and so on, at that time, most of the new immigrants who had come in were still exotic, were welcome, were a curiosity. It is only when the numbers got higher into the 70s and so on that overt discrimination started appearing, which is at what time Canada brought in what we call the official policy of official multiculturalism, which extends equal dignity to all the people. And that has made a big difference. But now, 50 years later, we are facing a backlash, what has been called as white lash, especially in the United States and across Europe. What is the major fault line of the Western countries these days? It is the color line. We don't want Mexicans and we don't want South Americans and so on who are not white to come to the United States, certainly not pouring into our borders. Same thing across Europe. Of course, by way of distinction, we say legal and illegal, but the xenophobia that is now spreading in the Western countries is really white people asserting their majoritarian authority, saying we don't really want to be multicultural. We don't want everyone to be equal. I mean, Mr. Trump is a perfect example of it. Canada still has...
Sorry to just jump in over here. Let us take a quick break and continue the conversation after the break, okay?
Yes, please.
Injured in an accident? Ticketed for DUI or traffic violations? You need Riz Injury Law on your side. Attorney Riz Ali fights for you, specializing in auto accidents, medical malpractice, slip and falls, traffic tickets, DUI and DWI. Call 312-546-5109 now. That's 312-546-5109. One more time, 312-546-5109. Your story matters, and Riz Injury Law will fight to make sure you get justice. Visit rizinjurylaw.com or stop by 35 East Wacker Drive, Suite 650 in Chicago, Illinois, 60601. That's Riz Injury Law. Justice, compensation, results. Call 312-546-5109.
Have no fear with regard to renewable energy. If you own property, either residential or commercial, in Northern Illinois, you most likely qualify for massive federal, state, and utility incentives. Grab a piece of paper and a pen and write down this number, 630-785-0031. You can have a no-cost, no-obligation conversation with a ComEd green light expert that can help you figure out which incentives you qualify for. Again, call 630-785-0031 for a free, no-cost, no-obligation assessment. 630-785-0031.
Welcome back to the Lightning Strike with Mohammed Fahim.
Good morning, folks. And we have Maria Mozaffar. Ken is joining us on the phone. John is not on the show today. We've got Mr. Haroon Siddiqui. We've got about 3 minutes to wind up our segment with Mr. Siddiqui. So thank you so much for staying on the phone with us. I think Maria has got a question for you.
Well, no, I was going to say, it seems like you are a pioneer for a lot of the political commentators and journalists that are speaking on the issues that you were speaking about. What is your opinion on the narrative and the angle that people like Mehdi Hassan and other people are, and how they are broaching the topic? And is there more of a audience there when there was at your time when you were writing such compelling pieces?
No, you see, there are two ways of looking at it. The United States is a big enough market and a big enough economy that there is room for all sorts of points of view. There is Fox News on the right, there is somebody else on the left, and each of them finds enough of a niche in America. The market is being so big. That is not generally possible in Canada, and that is rarely possible in the smaller European countries and so on. So the more voices, the better. America is a rambunctious kind of democracy where all points of views prevail. Everyone is shouting in the marketplace. The danger now is that in the United States, we have half the population not talking to the other half of the population. That is the biggest danger at this point. Because we can have democracy, we can have differences of opinion, we have adversaries, not enemies of each other. But that is what is happening in the United States, and friends of the United States like Canada, the great neighbor to the north, that is what we worry about most about the United States at this point. This rambunctiousness, this dialogue, this shouting and so on and so forth, has it crossed the point where people are not listening to each other? And part of it is the social media, because social media gave us a promise of greater freedom for individuals, a greater public square, true in the beginning. But now, that very institution, social media, has allowed each one of us to retreat into our own silos. I want to listen to only those who agree.
I have a quick question, too.
Ken, we are running out of time on the segment over here, Ken. So if you don't mind holding your question for Jesse Jackson. And Mr. Siddiqui is joining us all the way from Canada, folks. And your book now, My Name Is Not Harry, is running pretty strong on Amazon. I saw 8 reviews of it. All of them are saying it's an excellent book. And is there any other place that people can get the book now that you have just released it?
It is soon available in bookstores, ideally very quickly, and certainly is available on Amazon. And the only point to be made is it's written in Canada, but Americans and Europeans will find it useful because it responds to the common theme of how a multicultural, diverse society live with each other. how can we advance the common cause of our democracies together as opposed to tearing each other apart. That is the central message of this book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Siddiqui, for joining us. And folks, you are tuned in to The Lightning Strike. I'm your host, Mohammed Fahim. With me in the studio, Sheila White, Maria Muzaffar, Ken DeLuke is on the phone with us today. And we have got Jesse Jackson Jr. joining us, and I'd love to welcome him to the Lightning Strike. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us.
Mohammed, it's my honor. Hi, Sheila. Hi, Kendall.
Hello. You know, our guest today, we're so excited to have you in studio with us today. And you have the book, The Finger of God. I want you to talk a little bit about why you decided to write the book, The Finger of God. I know you have an awesome story and an awesome testimony as well.
Sheila, I appreciate that very much. And thank you, Mohammed and Kendall, for having me on. I was, as you know, I spent 30 months in a federal prison. And I had been helping men who could not read or write fill out pardon applications. And
Awesome.
I was thrown in solitary confinement, accused of organizing in prison. And for the 3 days that I was in solitary confinement, I reflected upon how and why the founding fathers established their faith in the Constitution and what their faith is. I stumbled on an experiment for the remainder of my 30 months in prison. I found a theological experiment in the Constitution, a theological experiment in the Constitution. It is a faith document. And the experiment begins in the Greek. It begins then and transitions to the Latin. It then transitions to the French. And they found a word construction for their Constitution in English that they called the finger of God. They placed this language very carefully in the Constitution. 43 days before the Constitution is written in the draft of the Constitution, the language is positioned one way. It's positioned one way. But 43 days later, on September 17th, 1787, it is inverted, and the word "and" brings the two ideas together to form a single construct in English. They called it the finger of God. I detail that experiment, and I close on this point to answer this question. If you are agnostic and you see the language, it means one thing. If you are an atheist and you see the language, it means another. But James Madison says, it is impossible for a man of pious reflection not to perceive in it the finger of the almighty hand, which is signally responsible for the rebellion. If you are a believer and a true believer and understand the experiment, you can see it in the Constitution as plain as the nose in the middle of my face.
Now, where can people get a copy of this? Where is the book available?
My book is available on Amazon.com. The title is The Finger of God by Jesse Jackson Jr. It's available on Amazon.com. The Finger of God by Jesse Jackson Jr.
Wonderful. Folks, we've got...
I just have one question. I just want to ask Mr. Jackson, why do you think that the Republicans in Congress are like crickets right now with all of the current administration dismantling everything that we fought for over time?
You mean the Democrats are crickets?
They're crickets too, right? Why are they just silent with all of this?
The Republicans are very boisterous. They're very loud. They're very excited about what Donald Trump is doing and what Doge is doing. It's Democrats who are sitting on their hands, in part because, Sheila, they are a minority party in the Congress, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. They are an aging political party where their leadership, from Chuck Schumer to Nancy Pelosi and Jim Clyburn, these are great public servants, but they're just too old for the modern era. These young Republicans are very, very serious evangelicals. And so until we recognize that, one, faith propels them, and our faith must propel us, but it must propel young people with young legs who can run, who can fight, who study the law, who understand their faith, who understand that all people deserve health care as a matter of their faith. that everyone deserves an equal, high-quality education as a matter of their faith, that we deserve a clean, safe, and sustainable environment because that's what God gave us when we inhabited the planet as a matter of our faith. And then they will be propelled to put up the kind of fight necessary to sustain the government. It is impossible, if you read that book, and I do mean the Holy Testament, it is impossible to remain a cricket and not have fire welled up in your bones.
So, Maria here, thank you so much. You said this term quite a few times, and that's faith. And you state that on the Republican side, you have a younger generation that's just energized with faith. And the Democrats are aging. But I wonder if you think, because you're making a clear linear relationship between success and speaking truth to power and faith, because it's our obligation when you're a person of faith, do you feel maybe the Democrats played down the role that faith plays in our lives, and then it has not authentically really motivated masses to really solve powerful, complex problems and be able to articulate and persuade masses, and which is maybe why the way we lost the election, the Democrats lost the election?
So on my program this week, I am now a budding radio talk show host. I
saw that at WVON.
Congratulations.
3 hours.
Reverend,
I would love to listen to you.
My very special guest was the Reverend Dr. Jamal Bryant, who's the pastor of New Birth in Atlanta, Georgia. And I asked him some version of this question, and he said 2 factors are in the silencing of the black prophetic tradition, but also the progressive prophetic tradition. First, the use of the government of the 501c3 tax status of the church. That is, the church is under assault, every one of them. Synagogues, temples, and Christian churches are under assault anytime they speak out for Gaza, speak out for diversity, equity, and inclusion, an inclusive society, to build a beloved community as a Christian church, to speak out for, if you believe in a 2-state solution or you're Jewish and you advocate for a 2-state solution, your temple, your mosque, your synagogue can easily be threatened by a weaponized government and your tax status revoked. So you hear a crickets in that regard. Second point that Jamal raised was the demonization, if you will, of Reverend Jeremiah Wright, which we saw during the Obama process. So no pastor, no imam, no rabbi wants to go through that. They just don't. They see, and therefore that leaves the evangelicals with this. They see Trump as the second coming, and we as progressive theologians and people of faith, we are left with arguments over separation of church and state, and that's not where they are. They have no problem with a faith office in the White House. They have no problem with Paula White in the White House. They have no problem with Franklin Graham coming in and out of the Oval Office. They have no problem anointing Trump in the Oval Office and praying in the Oval Office. But when we get there as Democrats, suddenly we have a problem with it. And so we don't energize our churches, our temples, and our mosques to do what we have a God-given right to do in this country, and that's to hold the government accountable to our faith tenets and precepts.
So true.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us. On that note, folks, we have Jesse Jackson Jr., who is now a budding radio host also on WVON. 3 to 6, you come Monday through Friday, or what's the dates for you?
Muhammad, Monday through Thursdays.
Monday through Thursdays. That is 1690 a.m., I believe, right?
That's correct.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will continue the conversation. This is so enlightening, and this is something that we have been trying to get across to people. Don't take things lying down, and we got to fight back, and our Democratic Party leadership has to be held accountable for not doing the job. On that note, we'll take a quick break, folks, then bring in the segment that we all wait for every Sunday, and that is Beyond the Echo Chamber with Maria Mozaffar.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Injured in an accident? Ticketed for DUI or traffic violations? You need Riz Injury Law on your side. Attorney Riz Ali fights for you, specializing in auto accidents, medical malpractice, slip and falls, traffic tickets, DUI and DWI. Call 312-546-5109 now. That's 312-546-5109. One more time, 312-546-5109. Your story matters, and Riz Injury Law will fight to make sure you get justice. Visit RizInjuryLaw.com or stop by 35 East Wacker Drive, Suite 650 in Chicago, Illinois, 60601. That's Riz Injury Law. Justice, compensation, results. Call 312-546-5109.
Have no fear with regard to renewable energy. If you own property, either residential or commercial, in Northern Illinois, you most likely qualify for massive federal, state, and utility incentives. Grab a piece of paper and a pen and write down this number, 630-785-0031. You can have a no-cost, no-obligation conversation with a ComEd green light expert that can help you figure out which incentives you qualify for. Again, call 630-785-0031 for a free, no-cost, no-obligation assessment. 630-785-0031.
Are you tired of hearing the same old talking points? Ready to dig deeper into the headlines that shape our nation? Join us on Breaking the Echo Chamber, a fresh, fearless segment on the Lightning Strike radio show. Every Sunday at 9:30 a.m., Maria Mozeffer takes you beyond the noise and beyond the divides. She'll break down the nation's biggest legislative stories, unpacking the truth behind the spin and exploring perspectives that matter to you. Tune in to the Lightning Strike on WCPT 820 a.m. and be part of the conversation that challenges the status quo. Don't miss Breaking the Echo Chamber, where the echo stops and the dialogue begins.
Hello, hello, hello. Here we are starting the dialogue. I always enjoy that pre-beginning to my section. So, first of all, I want to build on like this incredible introduction we got for this show this morning. Let's start with Haroon Siddiqui, right? And let's talk about breaking the echo chamber and what he was speaking about. So, one thing that really stood out to me, Sheila and Mohammed, and I don't know if this was compelling and how we can apply it now for the audience, but he specifically stated that people were brought in from different countries, and they arrived to Canada, and it was kind of exotic and very well respected.
Yes.
And we have the same experience of the immigrant community that came in the early 70s in this country as well. You know, they were treated as these diplomats, representatives from these different governments, so to speak, and there were articles written about them. You know, people thought they were so interesting.
Yeah.
And then it changed, and this is what Haroon Siddiqui said, is that at some point it changed when the numbers started changing.
Yes.
The numbers started changing. And so, and then now 50 years later, we see a backlash within Canada. And if we create that analogy within the United States, so we see that linear line here, right? We see welcoming people saying, oh God, you know, you're so intelligent and you have so much to offer as far as teaching us about the different parts of the world that we don't fly to. And we learn from each other. And then at some points when that expertise and that perspective kind of takes a big, stretch, growth.
Growth.
Absolutely, that's the word, growth. Then people feel uncomfortable. So the question is this. It was for Canada, the same question, and it seems like there's backlash. And the question is for our nation, too, is that do we have equity and learning from different countries and equality with conditions? Is that what the message is? And is that the message of the Constitution? And really, what is it about the growth? Is it the fact that the demographics are changing in the landscape, in the color? You know, Haroon Siddiqui said it's a color line.
Yes.
It's a color line. I mean, that Western nations feel that there's a color line, and it comes down to that. Is that what is making people afraid? Now, if you look at historically, the melting of people and the merging of people has happened throughout histories, you know, to create this beautiful, beautiful tapestry that we have. of the world, but for some reason it seems like now we consider ourselves in such a progressive modern society, technologically advanced, but our primitive thoughts about letting people that look different from us not grow the way we want to grow is seeping back in.
Wow.
And what kind of language is used to perpetuate that primitive thought? The other thing I wanted to touch upon, which I think is so powerful when we break the echo chamber, is that discussion that Jesse Jackson Jr. just had about faith.
Yes.
That is huge.
That's big.
Because what we're seeing is that people think, the way that President Trump won this election is by creating these categories, creating these This is, the people that didn't win. But there was an emphasis where the Republican Party took ownership of faith.
They did.
They did not shy away from the fact that they felt that there is a God and that there's a creator. Very boldly and very comfortably, and is it accurate, and the best way to approach the diversity of faiths and people that do have faith, is it better to just not talk about faith? Because that clearly didn't work, because it energized the Republican youth, knowing that there is a calling that they have to shape the society in a certain way. So on the Democrat side, they said, let's just not talk about it. Let's not talk about faith. Well, guess what happened? Yeah. What is the most inspiring, motivating thing from a majority of communities throughout history when they want to advance change? It's some sort of calling, some sort of spiritual awakening.
Yes, it is.
You know what I find very interesting? People don't know this, but in the 1970s, we see great people. We see Malcolm X, so many individuals that were within the prison system that found faith. So it is a transformative message, and the Republicans took it and owned it. Now, you could say, breaking the echo chamber, well, we don't want one faith to dictate. So we that's why we stay away from it. But then you've also closed the doors to everybody. Right. And how that manifests itself, and we've seen it, if you've ever seen, and it's very sad for anyone who looks at bullying cases that have happened around the country for young students, you will see young students that have some sort of symbol of a faith, whether it be a hijab or a yarmulke, really be pushed to the corner in some schools, in their public schools. Why? Because we just didn't talk about the beauty of faith. We just quieted everybody, right? And so I think what the victory does show, no matter what your opinion is that speaking about the Creator, speaking about people's faiths, does inspire and elevate the conversation, which has. Now, I wanted to talk about breaking the echo chamber on the state of the President Trump's address, but I also want to start out with Zelensky's meeting, because I want to know what I'll tell you, because there were two different perspectives.
I think what we can do is we can continue that part of the conversation after Chuck Krugel's reaction comes in, because we got about 1 minute to break the echo chamber, and then when we go back into the programming, we can continue the conversation. Well,
let's break the echo chamber on tariffs. Trudeau has a complete different opinion on these tariffs. Totally. He feels like you are hurting the American people, and we are your closest partner. That's true. And what you're doing is not going to result in anything that's going to help anybody, and it's affecting millions of just people that are wanting to be able to afford basic goods. I think Trudeau was basically saying that some of the retaliatory tariffs from Canada went into effect immediately, and there was another group that was going in later. And so, but then America first, strength through being, tough on this. Army. So that is the other perspective. So some people love these tariffs, and other people feel like strategically it's a short-term holding of the fixed high, but it's actually going to backfire. And so I think in his address, the audience, the Democrats definitely felt that it was not going to result in economic success. But do people really find that symbolic victory through tariffs? Let's call it that, because we're not seeing the economic results as gains right now. This is a symbolic victory that we're using. That's what
it's actually going to be hurting the country more than anything else, because everything is going to go through the roof. And Trump really is no economist, and Trump knows that he's no economist. He's just doing it for the show.
He thinks he's a king, so.
Yeah, okay. On that note, folks, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with attorney Chuck Krugel, who is an employment law attorney, management side, and we're going to be talking about quite a few things with Chuck. And stay tuned. You are tuned into the Lightning Strike on WCPT 820 AM.
Have no fear with regard to renewable energy. If you own property, either residential or commercial, in northern Illinois, you most likely qualify for massive federal, state, and utility incentives. Grab a piece of paper and a pen and write down this number, 630-785-0031. You can have a no-cost, no-obligation conversation with a ComEd green light expert that can help you figure out which incentives you qualify for. Again, call 630-785-0031 for a free, no-cost, no-obligation assessment. 630-785-0031.
Injured in an accident? Ticketed for DUI or traffic violations? You need Riz Injury Law on your side. Attorney Riz Ali fights for you, specializing in auto accidents, medical malpractice, slip and falls, traffic tickets, DUI and DWI. Call 312-546-5109 now. That's 312-546-5109. One more time, 312-546-5109. Your story matters, and Riz Injury Law will fight to make sure you get justice. Visit RizInjuryLaw.com or stop by 35 East Wacker Drive, Suite 650 in Chicago, Illinois, 60601. That's Riz Injury Law. Justice, compensation, results. Call 312-546-5109.
Welcome back to the Lightning Strike with Mohammed Fahim.
Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Lightning Strike. And you are obviously we have been having a lot of fun today, but we had some great guests, and our next guest coming in is Chuck Krugel. Chuck, are you on the line? Okay, I'm waiting to hear back to see if Chuck Krugel is...
Can you hear me, Mohammed?
Yes, we can hear you. Good morning.
Oh, sorry, that was weird. Okay.
Okay.
I'm fine, thanks. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, Chuck. And so a quick introduction, if you could, for our listening audience as to who you are and what do you do.
Sure. So I'm a labor and employment lawyer. I represent businesses. I talk business to business, management side, human resources counseling, transactional, like contracts and agreements, negotiations, and also litigation before regulatory agencies like the National Labor Relations Board and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Okay, folks. So Chuck and I are going to be having an in-depth discussion after the show is over today, and we'll be on Zoom, and I will share that on our social media platforms later. But we are going to dive real quick into what is happening with this DOGE and other stuff out there at the federal government now. Chuck, I want you to talk about the legality of these mass firings without giving notice, because we all know that you have to give the warn notice and all of that you and I have worked with over the last 15 years together on these things. What is the legality of these mass firings?
Okay, so first of all, warn doesn't apply to federal employees.
Okay.
You have to keep in mind that a lot of public sector entities are the types where it's do as we say, not do as we do. So, it doesn't apply. But there are, because a lot of these people are unionized, and they are kind of like some sort of civil service system, there are due process elements to their firings where basically they're supposed to get prior notice and a chance to appeal or otherwise complain about it and follow through some sort of grievance or review process. And so basically what they've done, what Trump must have done is basically break the system. People have talked about reform for decades now, and a lot of stuff, I guess, has been happening at the fringes, and then these guys come in and are basically breaking it up from the inside out. And that's what they're doing. And basically, my guess is if I had to estimate how many of these firings are illegal, I'd say at least 2/3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Okay. So, Chuck, here's the thing.
They busted the system.
Right. But you don't go around busting the system without taking into account the long-term social impact of this thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here people are getting nuts. I was listening to a lady who has voted for Trump for 3 times now, and now she's crying her eyes out, saying that, this, I never thought that this would come back and impact me on a personal level. A lot of people are getting impacted, Chuck. So the social impact of it, do we have as a country enough of reserves to, how do we handle these people who are getting laid off now? Are they going to be getting unemployment? If they're getting unemployment, both you and I know that unemployment is a drop in the bucket as far as finances are concerned. How do people survive, man?
I don't know, honestly. It's going to be very difficult for a lot of these people. And potentially, we're potentially entering a recession. Potentially right now, I'd say we're at the precipice of it. When you look at the unemployment numbers, last week's numbers for filings weren't as bad, but the prior week's numbers were very high, I think in the 20,000s. So I think we're on the precipice of some major economic shakeup that we haven't seen since 2008. It's just on a personal note, if I could relay this, that when I start getting phone calls from employees who are pissed off, that's different because I don't represent employees. And then they should, I guess they probably know that, but they're desperate and calling. And usually, in any given week, I maybe get one of those calls. Between last Thursday and Friday, and this was just a couple of days ago, I had about 6 or 7 calls from pissed off employees. And so I don't really, there's nothing I do for them, but, I've never seen this type of value before. And this is what we're seeing now is a shakeup in our economy, and it's going to impact the jobs. And you're seeing this at the federal level relative to DOGE. And you'll see this in the private sector, too, relative to companies who are scared about the tariffs and other funds, whether it comes from grants, loans, or whatever.
Yep, and Chuck, here's the thing that I'm concerned about, okay? When COVID hit and a lot of people got laid off, the unemployment system in our state was not geared up to handle that many claims, okay? That's what happened with a lot of people filing claims and claims getting rejected. There was a lot of fraud in the system. And I know for a fact that the state government spent $12 million in a contract to a private company to come in and help out with the unemployment claims. And now with this thing rolling down the hill at breakneck speed, I'm pretty sure that we are going to be having major issues in every state in the country.
Yeah. During COVID, by the way, somebody filed a fraudulent claim on my behalf against one of my clients.
Okay.
I had to contact the IDS and explain, no, that's a client of mine, and I don't work for them, and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So, I've seen it happen, and it's going to be, we're probably going to end up with a repeat of that, because I still don't think, like in the state of Illinois, I don't think our technology, our infotech systems relative to the Department of Employment Security are still up to date, or
the unemployment system is still based on COBOL programming. Can you believe it? Okay, so last time when COVID hit, they were looking for COBOL programmers, and obviously they did not find any COBOL programmers. They brought in this outside vendor. I don't want to take the name of the vendor, but I know that they spent, not 12, but $20 million, if I'm not mistaken, in trying to bridge that gap. Folks, Chuck Krugel, employment law attorney. He does mostly management side. And Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. And we will continue the conversation in at about 10:30, going back on Zoom, so we can do a deep dive into this. And thank you so much for joining us, Chuck. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back on the other side of the break with some more programming to wind up what happened between Zelensky and Trump and our vice president who's trying, crazy stuff is happening, folks. I didn't want to use the S word. It's almost
boxing match
slipped out. Okay, but
it's a clean show.
And we'll be back with programming on WCPT.
Injured in an accident? Ticketed for DUI or traffic violations? You need Riz, Injury Law, on your side. Attorney Riz Ali fights for you, specializing in auto accidents, medical malpractice, slip and falls, traffic tickets, DUI and DWI. Call 312-546-5109 now. That's 312-546-5109. One more time, 312-546-5109. Your story matters, and Riz Injury Law will fight to make sure you get justice. Visit RizInjuryLaw.com or stop by 35 East Wacker Drive, Suite 650 in Chicago, Illinois, 60601. That's Riz Injury Law. Justice, compensation, results. Call 312-546-5109.
Have no fear with regard to renewable energy. If you own property, either residential or commercial, in Northern Illinois, you most likely qualify for massive federal, state, and utility incentives. Grab a piece of paper and a pen and write down this number, 630-785-0031. You can have a no-cost, no-obligation conversation with a ComEd green light expert that can help you figure out which incentives you qualify for. Again, call 630-785-0031 for a free, no-cost, no-obligation assessment, 630-785-0031.
Welcome back to the Lightning Strike with Mohammed Fahim.
Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Lightning Strike. We're here with Maria Muzaffar and Sheila White. Ken Luke is on the phone with us, and John Arena is not on the program with us today. We are missing him. But we got about 7 minutes to wind up our show today. Let's go back to what happened with the presidential address, and after that, the meeting between Zelensky and Donald Trump, and who's the vice president again?
Yeah.
The guy has been missing in action all this time with the, co-president Elon Musk taking over his duties, and suddenly he pops up in the Zelensky meeting and throws a bomb out there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is always when you are trying to analyze what the other side is saying, no matter what side you're at, you have to understand that people can perceive and view something completely differently. There could be no words exchange, and just the way people are positioned and sitting invokes a certain response.
Right.
So the Zelensky meeting I thought was so fascinating because I heard both viewpoints. Like, I heard the viewpoint of how could it be so disrespectful to speak to somebody like this? He has a whole army behind him. He has people that are relying on him, that see him, that have lost loved ones that are in a war, and for him to be humiliated or spoken down to even in a harsh way, in any way that minimizes his role or seems that he's incompetent or he's arrogant, to present that on the national stage, what does that message send to the Ukrainian people? Does that demoralize them? Right? And then I heard the other viewpoint that no, it shows that the United States is bold enough to speak clearly through diplomatic pleasantries and just get to the heart of the matter and say, listen, we've been paying a lot of money as a nation, and we don't want to fight the war at this level, and we don't want to be paying those large amounts on the behalf of the taxpayers. And so I was just wondering what both of you thought about, because both of them, the person perceiving that interaction, what they're viewing is really, really driven by what their opinion is in general about President Trump and the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's what side you sit on.
It's crazy because even saying that you're not wearing a suit, I mean, that was just a jab, with lives being lost. And like you said, once this war is over, I'll wear a different kind of suit. I'll wear a costume like you have. It's insulting, to strong arm a person that's just trying to survive. That's just not right.
Here's my outlook on that, okay? We have certain treaty obligations with our allies. That should take precedence over mouthing off Russian talking points in the White House. Okay. That to me really, really hurt when our leaders are saying, you know what, we're going to give you the middle finger, finish this, and give us, by the way, your mineral wealth in order for us to help. United States has never asked people to give up something in order to help any country in the world, okay? We have always been altruistic in that respect, and for our leaders, so-called leaders now, to strong arm an ally, that hurts. it doesn't matter what I think about the war, the legality of the war, and the suffering of the Russian people and the suffering of the Ukrainian people. There's a war going on, and that's what Zelensky told Vice President J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
He said, there's a war. Have you been to Ukraine? And you saw, Vance just pulled back and he's trying to say, no, I heard about it. I read about it.
Saw a map.
Well, this is what I want to say is because, following that now Zelensky's statement was like he is ready to make a deal. And then he was on stage shaking hands with Trump and it kind of came full circle. So they probably had a private conversation on the phone. But I wanted to break down this discussion separate from that, because this is about how we engage with foreign leaders and how we engage with complex issues and show the nation that this is how discourse is done. And so and that is something that is just as important substantively, because we are presenting the way that we relate to the world. Right. That's very, very critical. And I do think that J.D. Vance, he said, have you ever once said thank you? Can you say thank you?
Yeah.
And now, if you're looking at it from that perspective and say, yeah, we paid tons of money, can you just say thank you? Now, if you look at it from the other perspective and say, this gentleman is in knee deep of saving lives and in a war. Clearly, he's come to this meeting. He's meeting with different people.
He's focused.
He's focused, and it's on the public stage to say, "Can you say thank you to the country?" So I don't know how it sits. To be honest with you, what message it gives to countries that are at war and what they're dealing with, and if their highest priority is to turn around and say thank you, and that it's not considered implicit. It's not considered implicit.
Okay, folks, I can hear that our going out music is coming in. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back again next week, same time, same station. Stay tuned to WCPT 820 AM or listen to us on heartlandsignal.com. Follow us on our Facebook and YouTube channels.
The preceding program, The Lightning Strike, was sponsored by Mohammed Fahim, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of Heartland Signal, LLC, or its management.